I was conscientized quite early in my life. I grew up, my father was quite political, and so he always made us aware of the politics of South Africa and the injustice in our society. So, for example, my father had suffered from the Group Areas Act. His business was closed down and we were forcibly removed. We lived in Newlands, which was next to Town, and we were forcibly removed. So our family, our goods were thrown out of the house. So I was very well aware of the oppressive system of apartheid. So when I was 16, I decided to join a whole lot of young people to protest the death of Steve Biko. I was 16 at the time and in matric. And what I did was I went to join the meeting. The brutality of the police, I mean, we had seen how they beat up the organizers of that particular protest. I mean, there was Anjani Poonen, who was in the Black Consciousness movement. And so we were in the cell for the whole weekend. And when Anjani arrived into the cell, we could see she was very badly beaten up. I joined the emerging Congress movement organizations there. So there was, of course, I came from the tradition of the Congress movement. My father was very active in the Congress movement. And so I came and I joined. There was the establishment of the Lenasia Youth League. We called ourselves anti-psych. The anti-psych campaign that, in fact, Busek attended that meeting. And at that meeting, he called for the formation of the United Democratic Front. I think it was 82 or 83. The dates now blur, but I'm not too sure. But he then, at that meeting in Lenasia, called for the formation of the United Democratic Front. I remember that we used to have a little gym class. And after the gym class, we used to do a little bit of a political talk. Then we formed the Residents Association, and that was really critical because as activists, we recognize the struggles of the people on the ground. And one of the training that we received, we were very fortunate in Lens. Our senior comrade was Lalu Chiba. He was a former Robben Islander. So we had all these little corners and spaces in which we were taught. I mean, there was political training and political discipline. So there was this thing that the struggle, we cannot have freedom, first of all, if the majority of the population are not free. So the first and foremost was to understand that we were part of the oppressed, but we couldn't have a bigger say because the African people must lead the struggle. And we participate on our own terms in the freedom movement, but on the basis that our freedom is indivisible from all the others. I can remember from like 1982, right up till 1990, 91, almost every Sunday, we went door to door, speaking to the people of Lenasia. Now, in 1982, 83, the apartheid government actually started what they call the campaign to opt Indians and coloreds in the tricameral parliament. And we were, of course, opposed to this. We recognized that it was an attempt by the apartheid government to break the unity of the oppressed. So part of what we did is we started the anti-tricam campaign. And in the first years, we went door to door. We went to every, at that time, I think Lenasia had about 50,000 houses. And we went door to door. We distributed it. Even in the week, we would go and we would explain to people. And of course, you never have to talk down to people because ordinary people understand their own struggle. They understand their own oppression. So we never talk down to people. But we did political education, but we did so with humbleness. So we went door to door almost every week. We spoke to people. And when the tricameral parliament, the elections took place, only 4% of the Indian community in how that time was the Transvaal, only 4% participated. there was a 96% stay away. But in the meanwhile, on the election day itself in Lens, it was a complete hotspot. Students came from other areas. One of the reasons was that the TIC was one of the few organizations after the banning of the ANC in 1961 wasn't banned. And it was one of the few organizations that had adopted the Freedom Charter as its program. So the strategy was that if we revive the TIC, because none of us believed in ethnic organization, but this was a strategic decision to make sure that we create this political space for the Freedom Charter to be adopted. And the government did react. I worked full-time for the TIC from 83, I think it was. I was a full-time organizer at that time. And I mean, we worked quite well with the UDF structures. We did work, we did campaigns. There were a myriad of campaigns, whether about education. But what happened, and I think, which maybe this is something that we need to relook at, we were in touch with ordinary people. We understood their will and we understood the democratic nature of our organization. And I think that sometimes in the practice now, we may have strayed from that. But at that time, there was very, very strong commitment to democracy. And I mean, one of the things in the UDF, which was fantastic, was that every debate was allowed. There were crooks. Like one of the guys had murdered his partner and put her in a suitcase, from the so-called House of Delegates, the Indian. So they were not able to attract any decent people to stand politically. The House of Delegates in the apartheid regime. There were all these one-person shows, all looking for an opportunity. What they wanted to do was to try and convince people that if you vote, you see, since the early 1960s, the apartheid government decided that they will declare, I think they didn't declare areas for colored and Indians and African people. So we lived in the townships near Johannesburg. So one of the campaigns I was involved in was we used to go to, so under the old apartheid voting laws, anybody had the right to scrutinize those people who special voted. So I used to go, one of the things I used to do is to go to the the polling stations, get the names of all the people who special voted. And then what we did is, it was an amazing campaign, because what we did is that was just like in 83 when computers just came out. We did a data sort. And we did, according to the street in lanes, we put up posters saying, in this street, I lived in Kondo Avenue, my opposite neighbor voted. We put up these posters which said, so-and-so voted for the apartheid regime. And people were embarrassed. They were embarrassed. We didn't do any violence against them, but they were very, very embarrassed. And some of them were scared. But we did that. We showed and shamed them for supporting apartheid. So the one was the resistance to the apartheid state as it was. The second one was to call for the improvement of people's, daily lived conditions. So people, the apartheid regime, I mean, if, there was so much exclusion from healthcare. There were very few hospitals, overburdened. So we did campaigns around that. We did campaigns around transport. So it's the delivery issues. And I mean, now people often talk about corruption, but in the old days, it was very corrupt. Because actually what you realize when you organize on the ground is that people are aware of their own oppression. You just have to ignite that in them. And they can, you can't lie to people. So this notion that people are lied to, so Botha, of course, used to call us in Afrikaans, agitators and terrorists. The agitators and the terrorists. The ANC was unbanned. And it was such a historic moment. I was at COSATU on the day that the ANC was unbanned. Actually, I was going to take a job at the National Union of Mine Workers at Comrade Ramaphosa's office, now the president. And he had disappeared because he had done an interview. He said to me, no, you must come. And they made this announcement. And everybody, you just saw, I don't know where they found this ANC flag. It was a massive, like I think a 10-meter thing. And they put it out of the window of Kusatu. That time they were in Rissick Street. And then they said, comrades, let's go out. And we all went out. And we were all running and singing and all of it. It was such a euphoric moment. You know, it's like almost unbelievable. It's a thing you focused your life on. When you were young, 10 years of your life is almost half of your life, you know. And so you're doing this and you think to yourself, wow, we achieved this freedom. There is nothing that will ever happen in your life again that will compare with that moment because it's such a massive thing and it's an achievement of the people of South Africa. But also at that time, I was working for Comrade Katrada, and I then, I worked still. We worked, but of course, um, Comrade Ramaphosa or Cyril was nowhere to be seen in the next weeks because he was busy with the release of the political prisoners and setting up the structures. He was part of the team to set up the structures for the ANC to return. So of course, that job of mine didn't take place. I mean, there was just no time. Timing wasn't there. So I then went and I just got a normal job because my dad was quite ill and I needed, we needed money to survive at home. So I just went to take a job. I worked for a music company that did protest music. Zwakem Bully was part of that company. And so, yeah, so I did that. But for me, it was just a job because my passion was the struggle and whatever. And after 1994, I managed to get a scholarship. I mean, one of the things that had happened post 1990 was there was this need because look, all of us didn't know when freedom will come. I was very fortunate during the negotiation period. I attended some of the negotiation meetings, not many, a few, two or three, I think, but it was such a special time. And, we were so proud of our leaders. Like they just were so good in negotiations. I worked for the Constitutional Assembly. I was the head of administration and finance there. It was one of the most remarkable jobs in my life. I mean, the struggle was its own thing. We worked hard. We worked for the vision that we had of our society, and we worked through our own belief. But the Constitutional Assembly was different. In a way, it was the realization of the goal and entrenching that realization. So even though I worked for finance and all of that, whenever I could, I listened to the meetings. I mean, and then when I was finished, I worked for the Joint Committee on Ethics. When I finished at the Constitutional Assembly, I worked for the Joint Committee on Ethics and Members' Interests at our National Parliament. And I was the Registrar of Members' Interest. And then I saw another side. Of course, when you're dealing with ethics, you see only unethical behavior. And it became a bit hard because one of the things that happened was, because you have so much hope, and then you start losing hope because you see bad behavior. And I had to be very conscious that I don't want to be a cynic. What work we did in the struggle, and just learning and understanding a vision of the world, which in a way is like we learned all kinds of things. You had to be very careful also who you interacted with. So sometimes you did sensitive work and you couldn't go around just with anybody because I wasn't in the underground or anything like that, but when I worked in the TIC, one of the things that happened, I think it was 86, 87, when Joe Slovo and McMahon came into the country illegally. I was the one, I didn't even know at the time it was what I was doing. I was just told, take this message, Cyril Ramaphosa and Halima Motlanthe. Just go and give them this message. I didn't know at the time it was to inform them that Slovo and McMahon came into the country. I took the messages. They told me, don't open that. The one thing which was inculcated in me is number one, that if you don't operate with integrity, you will lose your way. Number two, I think that no government can stop the will of the people. No government anywhere in the world can stop the will of the people. And thirdly, when we are in a post-liberation phase, we must always act in the public interest. Tweeting is not activism. Tweeting, putting something on social media is not activism. It's messaging. So the struggle is never won by 5,000 people. It's won by the millions of people.